So about 3 years ago, Apple, they released their first central processing unit, the Apple M1 CPU, under the Apple Silicon name. This is my Dell fully touchscreen laptop where I can just do this, and it's in tablet mode, just like an iPad. Pretty self-explanatory. The Ryzen 9 5900X, it wiped the floor with the M1 MacBook Pro. Alright, what's up? So what are we here for today? Today we are here to talk about the system that I have been, at least more recently, using to edit the majority of my videos. I use both Windows PCs and I use Apple Macintosh computers for my video editing, general use, gaming, things like that. So about 3 years ago, Apple, they released their first central processing unit, the Apple M1 CPU, under the Apple Silicon name of chip branding. Prior to that, the industry was pretty much dominated by AMD's Ryzen CPU and Intel's Core series of CPUs. This is my 2011 MacBook Pro. This has an Intel Core i7 CPU from, Intel. This MacBook Pro, 2007? This had an Intel Core 2 Duo CPU. Prior to Apple's own CPUs, Intel was pretty much the main game in town, at least here on the Apple side. Well, like I said, 3 years ago, Apple did their own thing. They released their M1 chips. They released it in November of 2020 during the height of COVID-19, that whole cluster. I remember watching that keynote and yeah, I had to have one. So we went down to Cupertino, California. Gonna pick up a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro with the new Apple M1 processor. We just came from Apple Park Visitor Center. They didn't have the MacBook Air.
No, they had it. It was just in a girly rose gold color.
We're in Apple Store. Infinite Loop, trying to get a MacBook. We got it. Woo, finally. Because I did not want to get the pink one. All right, we're all done here at Infinite Loop headquarters, old headquarters. We got MacBook Pro M1 13-inch. Excited to be back on the Mac after 5 years of Windows. Yeah, I've never been here before. This is the original headquarters, I believe. So cool. If I remember correctly, even our hotel had COVID protocols, like they didn't serve breakfast, things like that. So it was a different world back then. But yeah, with 3 years has come 3 years of improvements, innovation from Apple in regards to their Apple CPUs. They have since released the M2 processor and M3 processor here on the laptop and desktop side, trying to take it to Intel and AMD. I'm primarily an AMD user when it comes to the Windows side of things. I have here my custom-built Ryzen 5900X CPU here with the RGB lighting. One of the things I definitely appreciate here on the Windows side of things, the ability to customize your computer. I haven't used it much lately just because power bills have been getting a little bit high. It pulls about 700 watts to edit videos and things like that. It's a beast when I do use it, but like I said, I haven't really used it because this Apple Silicon thing kind of really changed the game as it relates to power to performance. When I'm not using that, and for whatever reason I'm not using the MacBook Pro, I'll tell you guys why later. This is my Dell Inspiron 14, and this one's kind of cool because it's a fully touchscreen laptop where I can just do this. And it's in tablet mode, just like an iPad, except it's using Microsoft Windows. And this has really been a cool system. This one is powered by an AMD Ryzen 7520U or something like that. And it even has pen support for using your pen as a mouse. Oops. So yeah. This one's pretty nifty. It's kind of underpowered, even though it's a Ryzen 5. It only came with 8 gigabytes of RAM. In my experience, 8 gigabytes of RAM on a MacBook Pro using Apple Silicon, any Apple Silicon, goes a lot farther than a Windows computer running 8 gigabytes of RAM. I immediately had to upgrade it to 16 gigabytes of RAM for it to be usable for Adobe Premiere. More recently, I've actually up the RAM on this one to 32 gigabytes of RAM to have it continue to be useful, at least for me. Is it usable with 8 gigabytes? I mean, it functions, it works, but rendering speeds and just overall system sluggishness with Adobe Premiere was awful on this one. But the 32 gigabytes, it is much better, but the M1 still runs circles around this thing. And like I said, I only bought this, 2 years ago, whereas the MacBook Pro is going on 3+ years now. So what's the point of all this? So kind of want to talk about this M1 MacBook Pro here. Almost 3.5 years old, and it's still going strong. The reason it hasn't really been my daily driver up until more recently is because I would always have it put away in my safe over here or in my backpack, and I would just be too lazy to get it out of the safe or the backpack. And whereas with these Windows systems, or especially this Dell down here, I wasn't too worried about it getting stolen or anything like that. Pretty easy to buy another one. And with the desktop computer, obviously that costs a lot more than even a MacBook Pro. It's a desktop computer. I'm not worried about anyone breaking in to steal that. Although that would be the one they should steal, let's be real. So unfortunately the MacBook Pro, yeah, I didn't really daily drive the MacBook Pro. It just kind of sat around being used more for mobile editing. But with, like I said, with the Power Bills, I've been using it a lot more. So if we look here on the MacBook Pro, Apple M1 from 2020, 8 gigabytes of RAM. The thing with this one area where it is starting to get old, to show its age, is in the battery. The reason why it's starting to show its age is probably because I did not use it, and there were definitely times when it would sit at dead cell probably. It's got 87% capacity now, but it only has 107 cycle count. So I mean, that has to be from the sitting at dead cell. But even with that, this system continues to still be more than usable for everyday use and of course for content creation. All my most recent YouTube videos have been edited on this system. So yeah, I mean, 3.5-4 years later, it is still going strong. I kind of want to do a comparison to kind of close out this era of my MacBook Pro computer, because I've already replaced it. This ice cream truck Lego video, this is going to be the last video that is edited primarily here on the MacBook Pro M1. Let's go ahead and do a test between my 3 systems here. The 5900X with 32 gigabytes of RAM, the Ryzen 5 7520U or whatever it is, 7000 series, which is really not 7000 series, with 32 gigabytes of RAM, versus the M1 MacBook Pro with 8 gigabytes of RAM. So it might be a little bit unfair because I do have the screen capture on the MacBook Pro. Screen capture is taking about 16% of the CPU, so it might affect it. But let's see. As we see here, timeline is very responsive. And I'm at full quality. Granted, I did render this scene out already. My timelines aren't super complicated to begin with. Usually I do a lot of speed ramps, hitting 1500%, 1000% speed. Let's go ahead and export it. We're going to export via media encoder. I'm going to use, let's go ahead and send it to media encoder. So Premiere Pro is using 5 gigabytes. We are hitting 861 megabytes of swap at the moment. I'm going to close Activity Monitor to free up some of those resources. I'm going to save it to the same SSD. I edit all my video off of one of these external SSDs just so I can swap it between Windows and Mac. So we shall see how it goes. So we're not done on the export yet, but I do actually want to talk about one of the concerns I do have about the M1 MacBook Pro. I have noticed that when I do an export, whether it be from Media Encoder or whether it be from Premiere, if I continue to work on the computer, browsing or watching other YouTube videos, sometimes it will glitch out the export file. I haven't had that issue with the 5900X or the Dell, so I have to believe that it has something to do with RAM, because both of these systems are running 32 gigabytes of RAM, or at least down here it was 16 gigabytes of RAM, whereas the M1 is only running the 8 gigabytes of RAM. So I have to believe it has something to do with that. When I do the exports on both of these systems, I'm going to not do anything on the system either. Just gonna set it, forget it, let it run, time it, and we'll see what happens. Alright, we are coming to the end of the export. We are at 17 minutes right now. It says 29 seconds left, so we're going to be just under 18 minutes. Of course, there is also the whole when is it actually done versus when it says it's going to end. Because sometimes it will end, but it's not done. Like, it's still doing something. So, let's see. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, it says it's done. I'm waiting for that. There you go, done. I don't know if that's good or bad. Let's go ahead and pause the video there. So it turns out I did make a mistake. I honestly didn't think it was gonna make that big a difference. I figured it'd make like maybe 30-second difference, minute difference, but as I was editing the video here, something just wasn't sitting right. So a few minutes ago, and this is a couple days later, mind you, I just popped out the M1 MacBook Pro. I haven't actually listed it yet. I exported that same video, same settings, everything on the M1 MacBook Pro, sans the screen recording. So we were at what, 17 minutes and 59 seconds? We were basically about just a little under 18 seconds at the export. Without the screen capture, I'm here. I'm at 10 minutes and 22 seconds. That's 7-8 minutes quicker than prior. So I saw that and I said I have to make an insert into this video to kind of correct that, because it is very relevant. So I just want to make sure I do that correction and insert it into this video, because I just want to make sure I'm not throwing out anything wrong. M1 MacBook Pro from Apple, great job 3.5-4 years later. All right, let's get back to it. Let's go ahead and bring up the Dell and we'll see. All right, I have the Dell Inspiron 14 up and running. I don't know if you might already be able to hear, but the fan is already going on this thing. But let's go ahead and get this. We are on full quality here. And once again, this video is already rendered out, so should be good. And timeline performance is not bad, but it just doesn't seem as fluid as it does on the MacBook Pro M1. That could be psychological. Not bad, and that 32 gigabytes of RAM definitely helps. I mean, we're running at what, about 17 gigabytes already. So we're gonna do it the same way here. We're going to go to Media Encoder, everything on here, well, that stuff on 60. Right, send the Media Encoder. So for reference, the MacBook Pro M1, the 7, we'll call it just under 18. We'll see how the Dell does. Gonna save to the SSD again. 3, 2, 1. And here we go. All right, we're coming up on the end of this encode, 20 minutes and 50 seconds. So let's see. We're gonna wait for it to show the red to be gone, because that is when it is truly done encoding or exporting, whatever. Alright, and there we go. We saw the export here on the Dell Inspiron 14 for the same video, 4 minutes more here on the Dell Inspiron, which was purchased 2 years after the M1. But it's a $700 to $800 laptop if I remember correctly, and it gets a lot hotter than the M1. I have the M1 here in clamshell mode. The fan didn't even kick on during that export. So that's one of the strong points of the M1. The heat and the energy consumption is really low on the M1. Alright, and finally here we are with the Ryzen 5900X system running the 6700 GPU by AMD. I have Adobe Premiere loaded up here with the same project, also the same SSD. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to export to the same SSD, and we'll see how it goes. Right off the bat, we are looking good in terms of the timeline performance here. Keep in mind, this is a Ryzen 5900X. This is a much higher end chip. We are perfectly fine here on the timeline here on the 5900X. Very responsive. So we're gonna use all the same settings, 2160, render maximum depth, render quality, 60 up here, and we're going to make sure we export to the, SSD. All right, and we're gonna send it to Media Encoder. 1, 2, 3, go. Ooh, this one's gonna be way faster than the M1. So yeah, at launch, the Ryzen 9 5900X was a $550 CPU. The M1 MacBook Pro down here was $1,200. pretty self-explanatory. The Ryzen 9 5900X with 32 gigabytes of RAM, 5 minutes for call it just under 6 minutes. So I'm glad it actually came out this way because I built this computer. I'm glad it's performing more or less the way that it should be. And I mean, it wiped the floor with the M1 MacBook Pro with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Should have been expected more or less. All three systems pretty much performed where they really should have performed in relation to their MSRP price. All the components in this system were way more than the $1,000 to $1,200 range that the M1 MacBook Pro came in at. That was pretty much it. Just a quick comparison between my M1 versus my PC. I am upgrading to the M3 Pro MacBook Pro. I already picked it up, open box. We'll talk about that in another video. That was an experience. But you know, it was time. This one's getting a little bit old, still working fine, but the value of it is still pretty high. And with that, that was kind of a M1 MacBook Pro 3.5-4 years later. Money well spent. Honestly, right now, if you could pick one up for like a good price, like say $600, definitely pick one up because it still performs very well, especially in the context of a mobile editing PC. You're not going to get this kind of performance from another similarly priced PC running at $500 to $600 range, which is what I would assume this one's going to sell for. You're picking up a modern version of this guy, which is a fine computer, but the M1 just feels so much more snappier. Yeah, if you get a chance, check out the Apple Silicon stuff, whether it be M1, M2, M3. If you buy one now, it doesn't matter which one. Probably more likely than not going to be really happy with the performance. But nowadays, pretty much every Windows program works on a Mac. You just gotta get the Mac version. Games, different story. You're not really gaming on a Mac. So in terms of the price to performance, once again, it's hard to beat the Apple Silicon stuff. M1 runs very cool. I've hardly ever heard the fan run on this system. M2 and M3, they kind of run a lot warmer, but power consumption, they have yet to catch up with Apple Silicon in terms of the power consumption. Doing that export, we're probably running about, like I said, about 700 plus watts pulling from the wall. So whereas with the MacBook Pro, it's not a lot. So yeah, and that's pretty much it. Like I said, we're moving over to M3 Pro. And with that, catch you all on the flip.